As I mentioned before, there's this guy named Igor who works as an assistant to 3 scientists at the NASA Observatory. The scientists are total klutzes. There's Papaya, the forgetful leader, Banani, a walking disaster, and Ravioli, whose mind is always on food. Igor never fails to tell me about the chaos his bosses create. And I was telling you about that time they remembered at the last minute that they had to travel for a work conference. We had said that Papaya and his colleagues leave at the last minute for the Dark Matter Conference. After a few failed attempts, they arrive at the airport where the check-in assistant checks their ticket. We left off when they were counting the suitcases and realized they had 20. And the assistant was checking Papaya's ticket to see if they could do something for him. Papaya's ticket? Sorry, I misspoke. I meant the reservation. Yes, in fact, there's no ticket for Papaya. Just a reservation. Oops, I forgot to pay. Is the reaction of Papaya upon hearing the unfortunate news. But no problem, Papaya. It's just a matter of stopping by the ticket office. Igor adds, just enough time to miss the flight. In any case, Banani, who heard nothing because he's deaf in one ear, kept loading the suitcases onto the conveyor belt. The most interesting part of this story is that all 20 suitcases stacked on top of each other suddenly opened at once like some sort of explosion of clothes and scientific instruments, scattering everywhere in the baggage handling area, which is strictly reserved for staff. Now let's make a couple of points. First, from what we've said, we could deduce that this was Banani's first flight. Second, but even if that's the case, is it possible that our amateur traveler doesn't know, nor even imagine that suitcases are loaded one at a time onto the belt, and most importantly, with the operator's consent? Third, I forgot to tell you that Banani's reaction to the bags bursting open is to jump onto the conveyor belt, which, as we mentioned, is strictly off limits to staff only, and start gathering the scattered items to put them back into the bags and close them up again. This crazy gesture doesn't sit well with the assistant, who calls security. Banani's argument with the security guards is as follows. Wait a minute, I'm almost done. Igor tells me that if it weren't for Papaya, Banani, instead of spending the night on the plane with air conditioning, would have spent it in jail. Either way, he would have been kept cool. The moral of the story is that, as if nothing happened, Banani and Ravioli are still talking about the book. It almost seems like these oblivious folks have nothing else to talk about. Now, this is pure speculation, but sometimes I imagine the beginning of their conversation like this. Hey, Ravioli, this trip is a bit boring. Nothing ever happens. Always the same things. The bags exploding at the airport and the security almost arresting me. And the other one replies, Banani, you're absolutely right. Always the same old stuff. Thank goodness we have this coffee-stained book to talk about. But again, this is just speculation. Anyway, the conversation about the book goes something like this. Ravioli says there's a creed in 1 Corinthians 15, which, according to scholars, comes from oral tradition. Banani, aside from being deaf in one ear, doesn't know what a creed is or what oral tradition means. Ravioli tries to explain it in simple terms. It seems that in the first century they didn't have the internet. Banani is stunned by this discovery. Ravioli continues. Neither internet, nor TV, nor newspapers, nor even books. Banani now understands why people had so many children back then. But if none of these existed, where did they read the news? Banani still hasn't grasped that most people back then were illiterate. So everything they had to learn was spoken aloud and memorized. Ravioli, using a culinary analogy, emphasizes that writing, which was done on papyrus, wax tablets, and skins, was the icing on the cake. Banani more or less understands what oral tradition is, and now he needs to know what a creed is. Ravioli explains that to make it easier to memorize, the information had a symmetrical structure with rhymes and wordplay. And this is precisely what leads scholars to identify the beginning of 1 Corinthians 15 as a creed translated from Aramaic to Greek. Banani realizes if the resurrection is an evolved legend, then why were people in the first century talking about it through oral tradition? Ravioli explains that this creed is traced back 2 to 5 years after Jesus' death. And it was used, like other creeds, by common people to preach the resurrection and share the gospel. Igor tells me that, speaking of legends, those three, with those bags in that airport, were about to become a new urban legend. Audience. Igor cracks me up every time with his stories. And those scientists, I'm speechless.